Thank you, Valentin. Thank you, Tuche, and thank you all of you for coming out today to be protesting and taking a stand against this appalling racist legislation that is being proposed by our Liberal government. I also want to start by acknowledging that we are here today on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land, and to honour and pay our respects to those traditional owners of the land, and to remind ourselves that they didn't ever cede this land, they didn't give it away to us when we arrived, to the rest of us who aren't First Australians, and that we need to have justice and peace with those Indigenous Australians and have treaties and they need to have treaties and sovereignty over their land. And it's really appropriate to acknowledge that at today's rally, because other than the First Australians, we are all immigrants. I think there are 4 members of the Federal Parliament, 4 or 5, who are Indigenous Australians. The rest of the 225 or a few more members of Federal Parliament are all originally migrants to Australia. Australia is a multicultural nation. Australia is made up of people from all over the world who are welcome here, who make up the most amazing, diverse, tolerant, more than tolerant, place where we respect people's difference, we respect the individual contributions that people bring to this country. And this law that is being proposed is an attack on that. It's a law that's based in racism. It's a law that's based in fear. It's a law that's based in hatred. It's not a law that's based upon what we know are the Australian values of the 21st century. The Australian values of being welcome, of valuing everyone, of working together, and of actually seeing our differences as things to be celebrated rather than things to be worked against. And these proposed laws are going to have a massive impact on people's lives, and I know that's why you're all here today. Some of you are being affected yourselves, others know of people who have had huge concerns put in their way. They just want to be able to be here in Australia, to be contributing to our country. Our Greens immigration spokesperson Nick McKim has spoken out against these laws in the Parliament already. And all of the Greens are standing with you to make sure that these laws don't get passed through the Senate. We've heard from lots of people, lots of phone calls, lots of messages, lots of emails. I just want to share with you 3 messages from people who are having their lives impacted by this legislation. First up, there was someone called Nat who's studying for a PhD here in Australia. And he says, I chose Australia due to it being multicultural and the ease of communication with the local community, because I can't speak German and I'm quite fluent in English. But my main reason of choosing Australia was to get settled here, because in my home country you don't get the freedom to openly express your views. Why do I need Australian citizenship? One reason is to feel secure and the ability to speak freely, and another reason is to avoid a situation where I felt quite helpless or people taking advantage of me just because I'm not an Australian citizen. I want to see Matt being a citizen of Australia. Another person is Louisa, and Louisa says, I'm an Australian-born citizen, but my husband has been here for the past 8 years, working, studying, paying taxes, buying property, and speaking English better than me. He was due for citizenship in 3 weeks. However, that's been pushed to 3 years under the new laws. We are appalled and upset as we've had our lives planned. And here's Caitlin, who's been here for 6 years. I was due for my citizenship on the 7th of March. I started my application on the 18th of March, but did not get to finish it and send it off until the 20th of April, when this shock announcement came out. I've just had a baby. I'm married to an Australian. My son is also Australian. I've many Australian friends. Caitlin was about to become a citizenship, but because of this new legislation, that is being put off, and she doesn't have the ability, like I know many of you are in this situation, to have the rights and the responsibility of citizenship. And it's incredibly important, and the reason why we offer citizenship to anyone who comes here and wants to contribute to Australia, who is contributing, who fits into Australia, is because we don't want to create a second class of residents who don't have the rights and responsibilities of being Australian. And that is what this legislation is going to make happen. For longer periods of time, people who should be Australian, absolutely fulfil those Australian values of respect and working together, are denied citizenship. It's an appalling piece of legislation that the language elements of it, in addition, there's so many people here in Australia who don't have university standard English. I was meeting an elderly Greek woman last weekend in Yarraville. She was 91 and her English was pretty basic, but she told me about her life. She told me how she had worked in factories for 50 years. In fact, she spoke Yugoslav better than she spoke English because she had Yugoslav co-workers working alongside her. She had made a huge contribution to Australia and she was an Australian citizen. And it's people like her that this legislation would be denying the ability to become Australian citizens. It's legislation that's, as I said, based in racism, based in fear, based in Islamophobia, and it must not get through the Parliament. So thank you for coming out and protesting here today, and I promise that we as the Greens will be working hard with you to make sure this legislation does not pass through the Senate. Thank you.